Hi, everyone. My name is Raj Bhowmick. I'm a director of sales engineering here at TrueFort. So what TrueFort does is using its patented behavioral analytics, it can apply a number of different controls to limit lateral movement, including micro-segmentation, as well as service account analytics, file integrity monitoring, and server hardening. So we're going to go through these capabilities here in a little bit. So with anything, you need to first start with visibility, understanding what it is you need to protect. And what TrueFort does here from a visibility standpoint is it creates a real-time continuous application relationship map showing the different dependencies, relationships, both between applications and within applications. And it does this by taking telemetry from multiple different sources, including third-party EDRs like CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, as well as a native TrueFort agent. We also have a daemon set that allows us to protect different Kubernetes environments, whether they're in the cloud or running on-premise. And then finally, we can also tap into the cloud provider telemetry itself, like AWS, Azure, GCP, and the like, to provide visibility and protection around cloud-native assets. So as our CEO is fond of saying, we protect cloud to the ground across the entire application estate. Once we establish this visibility, we then use our patented behavioral analytics to establish an application baseline. And this is done using machine learning. Using this application baseline, we can then start to establish a number of different protective controls, like micro-segmentation, as well as service account analytics, file integrity monitoring, as well as server hardening. And then on top of these controls, we do continuous behavioral monitoring, detection, and response, where we are alerting whenever there is a behavioral anomaly detect. We can also run workflows, which include kicking off a SOAR process or creating a ticket. And then finally, we can also block different behaviors like network connections, processes, user sessions, etc. So this is a quick overview on the TrueFort platform itself. The next thing I'm going to do here is go into an actual demo to provide you with an overview of the TrueFort platform. So let's switch over. So now in TrueFort, here you can see a visual map that shows a number of different applications represented in the blue. This happens to be an example of a financial services organization where you've got applications like finance as well as loans. And there are different types of environments here as well, as you can see, like UAT environments, production environments, and development environments. So what TrueFort is doing here is taking that telemetry that we collect from the third-party EDRs, from the TrueFort agents, as well as from the daemon set and the cloud. We're providing a holistic picture into every application within the environment and the relationships between these different applications. The green and red lines basically tell us what is normal behavior versus abnormal behavior, and that determination is made based on our machine learning, behavioral analytics, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Views can be role-based, so for any organization where you've got different business units, different stakeholders, every stakeholder will have views into the applications that matter to them. And in our example, we do demos to many different types of companies. So we have different vertical demos for healthcare, for financial services, manufacturing, and each of those are different views. So what I'm going to do next here is I'm going to take one of these applications like ERP and show you how we can focus in on this particular app, as well as drill down into the details of this app. So here in the middle, you see these blue objects. These objects represent different workloads or servers that make up this particular application. Of course, a workload can be a physical server, a virtual server, a container, a cloud native component. Just kind of going back to that saying of, cloud to the ground, we're showing a holistic view of the application here. So if it's a hybrid application consisting of both cloud and on-premise components. We're going to represent all those different components here, as well as their different relationships. So we can see the connections between this application as well as other common components like you see on here on the left, like DNS server, NTP server, SMB server. And then we also have these unregistered nodes on the right that haven't been classified yet. This is fairly common when we turn on TrueFort for the first time. Let's say for an organization already running CrowdStrike or SentinelOne, they get a full picture into their environment and they see a lot of things that they weren't familiar with before. So this presents us an opportunity where we can go back and label these unidentified or unregistered nodes so they are represented accordingly on the platform. We can see a tabular representation, or I should say a graphical representation of this application. We can also move over into a tabular view that gives us more of the details around these application relationships. And this is where you'll see the differences between TrueFort and other visual maps in that we're providing the application context around each of these relationships. What that means is we're not only showing the network connectivity information, such as source, target, IP address, port, and protocol, we're also capturing the application process service as well as the service account that's either driving that connection or on the receiving end. So that's what we mean by full application context. And this is pretty critical because it's this information that we use to establish what normal behavior is of the application. And then using that behavioral profile, we can drive those different controls like micro-segmentation, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, as well as the continuous detection and response, where we look at anomalies and then we monitor, detect, and respond to those anomalies. This is the visibility piece of TrueFort. So the next step is so the next question is, how do we create this behavioral profile? Well, it's very simple. We use machine learning where we can go in here and we can actually look back in time and analyze a period of data or a data for a period of time. So here I'm picking a 2-week period, which is typical for TrueFort. We look at 2 weeks worth of activity, and then we use our wizard here where I hit submit to initiate the machine learning and then establish this behavioral profile. So essentially this screen here is the output of that automated task, which looks at that 2 weeks worth of data and it creates the behavioral profile based on the 2 weeks worth of data. On top of the machine learning, I can also create policies by hand. In the case where you have end of month, end of quarter types of jobs that are pretty predictable, you know what those are, you can capture those common services, common jobs by either creating the policies here, or you can express those policies in a JSON format and then push those via the API as well. So there are a number of different ways in which we can establish behavioral policy here within TrueFort. The other key thing to keep in mind is we have a concept of application policies as well as global policies. So common behaviors like your EDRs, your Active Directory, other common services, we can capture the policies of those services in the form of global profiles. And then here is a listing of some of those, global profiles that we can apply to this application. And that way we could also do it the other way around, where we select a global profile and apply it to one or more applications within the environment. So that's how we establish the behavioral profile. So this is really our foundation. This is what we take now to start to establish different controls within the application, starting with micro-segmentation. Now, micro-segmentation is really all about generating those host-based firewall policies. Now, the approach that we take that is different from other approaches is we use a behavioral profile to drive the micro-segmentation policy. So most of the work here is already done. All I need to do is see a preview of the microseg policies, which you can see here on the screen, are incoming connections, including the IP address port, as well as the outgoing permitted, connections, IP address port and protocol. All that is already captured here via the behavioral profile. So the only thing I need to do then is test this policy, which is where our observation mode comes into the picture. So before I go into blocking, I can have TrueFort, simply monitor my connections, and that's exactly what I'm doing here, as represented by, the green and red. I'll go back into the ERP application where we can see, the specific green and red connections. I could pull up a list of alerts here that indicate what connections are anomalous. So this helps us identify what would be blocked and what would be allowed if we were to turn on microsegmentation. So this is what we do, before we actually turn on microseg. Now, in the case where we find connections that are actually normal connections, so these are like the less frequent types of connections, I can actually go in here and I can merge this connection into the behavioral profile. In other words, it's going to create a new policy for this particular connection or alert that I've highlighted. So that's how we address any alerts that, represent normal connections. Then that process is going to run for a little bit of time. Typically, it's about a few weeks, worth of observation that you want to do until you decide you want to turn on microsegmentation. So microsegmentation can easily be turned on by going back into the profile and then selecting deploy policies to enable microsegmentation. So very easy, very logical, from the standpoint that we're using the behavioral profile to drive the microsegmentation policy. The second control that I want to talk about is service account analytics. So because TrueFort is collecting endpoint data and stitching together the full application context, process, identity, and network, that gives us a unique view into every service account executing in the wild and telling us what application those service accounts are running, as well as the connections that they're spawning. So here's a view that I'm showing that actually captures our top service accounts based on privilege. So we can see here root is a very, obviously very common. We're not surprised that root is at the top of the list. So we'll go ahead and filter this out. But now we see other service accounts that we defined that we can now understand how much privilege they have across the environment. For example, we have the Samurai account that has accessed 27 different servers over the past 24 hours. And in terms of applications, we're seeing somewhere around 18 different applications that this application has accessed over 24 hours. And if we change the time frame, that number may actually grow. So this view helps us in terms of understanding what our most privileged, aka risky service accounts are. So we can start to come up with a plan around how to control these service accounts and what they can or cannot do. So that's the service account analytics piece. The third control is around file integrity monitoring. So if you're familiar with other solutions that check for things like file changes by looking at the file checksum, as well as permissions, as well as ownership, we do the same thing here as well, except it's the same TrueFort agent that's doing it as with the case, with microsegmentation, server hardening, and the other capabilities that we talked about. So here, if I go under file scan, we can see the different policies that we've defined for file integrity for this particular ERP application. So here, the different directories, the different files that we're monitoring for any type of change, including content, that's where our checksum comes into the picture, our read-write settings in case those settings change, as well as user and group ownership settings. So TrueFort will monitor for changes on a schedule basis. It could be every minute, it could be once an hour, depending on what your specific requirements are. And based on any change, TrueFort will generate an alert as well as take any workflow-driven action that you want as a result, which may include, let's say rolling back a version of a particular file to its, previously known state. So that's file integrity monitoring. And then the fourth piece is around server hardening, where TrueFort uses common benchmarks like the CIS benchmarks as well as NIST to check for hardening status at the server level. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the ERP application and I'm going to perform a workload scan using the CIS benchmarks. Now, TrueFort already knows how to scan these workloads based on operating system, so I'm simply going to hit evaluate, and now it's going to come back with a score showing, relative compliance to the CIS benchmark. So some of these, like the Linux servers, are 50% in compliance versus the Windows servers only 18%. So if I click on one of the Windows servers and expand my screen, now we get more details around what's compliant and what's not compliant. So here is an itemized list of the different benchmarks for Windows, and we can see what is compliant, what is not compliant. So this gives organizations the opportunity now to properly harden and fix any issues with these servers. And then once these servers are properly hardened, TrueFort can then do drift monitoring to check for any unauthorized or unintended changes to these servers. So let's say this, particular benchmark 1.2.3 was originally green. Now it turns red for whatever reason. TrueFort will generate an alert, notify the appropriate people so that the appropriate steps can be taken to resolve this issue. So taking these four controls together, TrueFort provides a very comprehensive solution around controlling lateral movement. So then the final piece, and this is the piece that works on top of all these different controls, is our continuous detection and response. And I'm actually going to go through a live example to show you how TrueFort can do continuous behavioral analytics and anomaly detection and take any type of action when it detects an anomaly. So I'm going to take the CIMS application as an example. I also have a SSH session open to my command and control server. It's called cc-demo. I'm also going to open our alerts so that as running this attack, we're going to see alerts pop up as well as red lines pop up here in our graph to this Forerunner demo server. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run this automated script called get fragments, which essentially is going to connect to these three other servers below Forerunner, and it's going to pull some sensitive files from those servers, aggregate them, and then push them to a staging server for exfiltration. And then somewhere along the way, TrueFort is going to stop this attack. So initially, I'm going to run get fragments, and the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to copy those files from those three servers that I talked about. And as the script is running, we are going to see lines appear connecting the Forerunner demo server to these other servers at the bottom. So we're just going to give this a few more seconds to go. And we can also see actually the connections, the alerts here, representing those connections that the script just made. And we also see the lines here as well now. Now, the last thing is TrueFort is going to aggregate these files and then push them out to a staging server. And this is where we're going to see TrueFort stop this exfiltration attack from continuing. The connection here is stalled, as we can see here on the screen. We also see an alert representing that connection to this 10.0.0.7.5 machine. If I go into the connection annotations, I'm going to see that within the same time frame, 2:04 p.m., 16 seconds, TrueFort opened an alert, and it also applied a blocking workflow. So that's why this connection solved, because TrueFort inserted an IP tables rule that essentially blocked this connection and prevented anything, from anything further from happening. Now, of course, this alert would have gone to a SIM. So whether it's Splunk or QRadar or any other SIM solution that you use today, you would have seen this alert on your SIM and then move over into TrueFort to drill further into this particular incident. Now, of course, that takes time. You're probably going to be in TrueFort, a minute later, 2 minutes later, whatever the case might be. This is where TrueFort provides playback capabilities where I can actually go back in time. So I can rewind my view hours, minutes. I can also go back a week if I wanted. We have retention that can go back as far as you want. It could be 30 days, it could be a year. Really all depends on how much storage you want to dedicate and what your retention requirements are. So anyways, from our perspective, we're really just interested in this particular alert that happened at 2:04. So I can actually have TrueFort go there for me at 2:04 p.m. And now I see the different connections representing that particular attack happening beforehand. And then if I move this window here to the bottom, we can see the connection to that 10.0075 server, which should have happened a minute later. So again, I'm going to move this over so we can see, and there it is, the 1077 or the 10.0075 server. So not only do we see this from a application view, we can also see this from a process level view as well that shows the process itself. In this case, it was an SCP command that was attempting to push this really precious .dat file out to this 10.775 server. We know that TrueFort blocked this connection proactively. But then we can also see, and this is why I rewinded back a minute, these were the connections here representing Forerunner connecting to those, 2 or 3 other servers to retrieve those sensitive files, before consolidating them and then pushing them out to that staging server. So what this essentially represents is 2 things. Number one, TrueFort provides very deep investigative forensics capabilities for incident response teams, as well as threat hunting teams to analyze incidents and threats. And then 2, with our real-time blocking capability on top of micro-segmentation, we can proactively stop attackers in their tracks before they ever reach that crown jewel object or asset, either by blocking network connections, processes, user sessions, etc. We have about 45 or so different workflows that we can execute to essentially block something within an environment. So that is real-time detection and response. The final thing that I'm going to show, and we kind of showed a preview of this in the service account analytics section, is our reporting capability that is on, Kibana and Elastic and Elk. So this reporting capability gives many stakeholders many different things that they can do. I can, go past hour, past day, week, year. This is also, based on how much storage you allocate, what your retention requirements are. From our perspective, we're not limited in terms of how much data we can keep. It's all based on physical storage. So what this does is it allows, for instance, IR and threat hunting teams to do very detailed investigations using this historical data. It also gives executives the ability to understand their overall risk and exposure, but more from a business standpoint. And also for, security analysts and security engineers, more of a technical view into risks. So here we have an example of a risk posture report that shows things like pre-production environments connecting to production environments. So we can see the applications involved as well as the specific connections that are made between pre-prod and prod. We also give visibility into unencrypted communications like HTTP, as well as Telnet, as well as incoming RDP sessions that don't use any type of jump host, clear text FTP type connections. And this is just, some examples of the types of risks that we can surface using, TrueFort telemetry. And keep in mind, this is runtime telemetry. This is not a snapshot. This is not point-in-time data coming from a vulnerability solution, although, that data is extremely valuable. This is runtime data that gives us views into actual risks, within the environment. Other things that we can do with this reporter is we can ask all types of questions. Like an example would be, tell me where my PII SQL Server and MySQL databases are so that I can understand, for instance, what applications are using those PII databases, as well as, what are the actual connections being made to these databases, both incoming as well as outgoing. So we can see that there are a lot of different connections here being made. We can see, the top IP addresses making these connections, as well as what ports they're using. And interestingly enough, there are some unencrypted 80 HTTP connections, as well as port 22 connections. So are these valid? Those are the things that we need to investigate. But this, gives us the information, at least, to go and investigate those connections. And similarly, we also see some outgoing connections here that are 443, port 80, port 53. Again, it'd be good to understand, are these, valid connections? So TrueFort is giving us visibility into things from an application perspective that we couldn't easily get with other solutions unless we have data scientists, working around the clock to stitch this information together. So this is a quick overview of our reporting capability. And just to close, we've demonstrated a comprehensive platform here with TrueFort, where, again, our objective is to help organizations manage and control their lateral movement. And we do this by first creating visibility, leveraging existing EDRs like CrowdStrike, as well as SentinelOne. We also provide our own agent, which can go back and look at, even legacy platforms in addition to, modern platforms, legacy platforms being like Windows 2003, older versions of Linux. And then TrueFort agent also looks at containers, Kubernetes, as well as cloud native, which is done, via API through, the cloud native, services themselves. So comprehensive, visibility across cloud as well as data center, and then taking that visibility using behavioral analytics, machine learning to establish, a behavioral profile, which then those different controls like micro-segmentation, service account analytics, file integrity monitoring, as well as server hardening. And then on top of that, real-time detection and response capabilities that not only provide anomaly detection and alerting, but also blocking as well in real time. And then finally, a comprehensive reporting platform that allows different teams and stakeholders to run reports, as well as query the data by asking any type of question, just like you would with other log management and other, reporting solutions. So with that, I would like to thank you for taking the time to view this overview and demonstration of the TrueFort platform. Any questions you have, or if you'd like to drill in further, please don't hesitate to contact us by visiting us at www.truefort.com.